My name is Letitia Kelly Butler. I go by Tish Butler. I joined the USAID Agency for International Development in 1977. I was not long out of undergraduate school. And I met my husband, Malcolm Butler, at the agency, and we together, as a tandem couple, in the early wave of tandem couples for AID and state, we served together in Bolivia, Peru, Lebanon, the Philippines, and Guatemala. It has been nothing but a wild ride the whole time. A wonderful, wonderful experience. It's full of learning, of language learning and culture learning. It's full of doing what's necessary for people who don't have the resources to achieve what they need in life, to move in that direction. AID is an organization that is about building capabilities, building resources, building nations, really. What comes with that work is also, in many places, and actually everywhere we went, some form of danger. In both Bolivia and Peru and the Philippines, we were dealing with extremist groups that were attacking the government and by association attacking the Americans. But the place that we really felt that most poignantly was in Beirut. We were sent there because a major plus-up of aid to Lebanon was voted in by the Congress because of the Sabra Shatila massacre and the placement of the U.S. Marines in protecting the airport around Beirut. So we were yanked out of Peru and sent quickly to Beirut. We were working slavishly to get a program going because it was only about $12 or $15 million, and there were $250 million that we were supposed to program. So we were there in October, and by April, it was time for Malcolm. He was called back to Washington to do some consultations about April 14th or 15th. And so on Monday, April 18th, I got up and went to work at the embassy. And because Malcolm was gone, his deputy, who was acting mission director, held an earlier conference, and I went to the cafeteria in the building a little bit earlier than I usually did. I walked down to the cafeteria, which was in the foreground, the front of that very now historic embassy building, which was U-shaped, focused outward on the Corniche, the main road going around the edge of the Ras Beirut area and looking out on the water. And so I went down there to get lunch, and I sat and I was eating, and I saw my two very good friends walk in. And one of them was Ann Damrell, who had been working in the aid mission for 3 years there through all of the tough time and through all of the Sabra Shatila work, and she was a heroine, really. And she was about to leave. So I got up when I finished to go sit with them, she and Bob, and but they were at a tiny table for two, and they were against the wall that went towards the ocean. So I decided I'd go upstairs and study French or Arabic. I was studying both. I don't know which one I was doing. And went back up, and I went to my office, which is at the back of the building. And it had, it was a single room, and it had floor-to-ceiling glass doors to let the light in. And a week before this day, for no reason that I can explain, I decided to move my desk, which was placed directly in front of the floor-to-ceiling glass doors, into a corner. So it was catty corner in the room. I went, sat at that desk, closed the door to study, and not long after that, I felt a change in air pressure. Just, I can't explain it except that it was a sudden change in air pressure, followed by a low, ominous kaboom. And by the end of the boom, the whole building shook. The glass door behind me blasted in and shards right past me, missed me by a foot, and knocked my desk over. So I knew that something bad had happened. I assumed it was some kind of a bomb, and I grabbed my purse and I ran to the door and had to yank it because it was jarred. And I went into the into the central atrium area of the building. I was on the 4th floor, and it was filled with dust and cement and swirling everything. And I saw that I couldn't go down, so I decided to go on the same floor to the AID mission director's area to see who was there, who was hurt. I knew that the acting mission director, Bill McIntyre, was lunching in the cafeteria when I left, and he was having lunch with a female reporter, who actually was the character that was based on which John le Carré based the book, The Little Drummer Girl, and she was interviewing him about AIDS assistance. But who was available? His wife was up in his office visiting, and she had been in the bathroom on the front of the building, and the glass had blown straight into her face, and she had pale skin and white blonde hair, and she just looked like something out of a monster movie because she was bleeding. So nobody else up in that area was killed. So we kind of collected people and guided Mary Lee out to that area and down the stairs to the 2nd floor. There was a window there that we could open, and a shed had been built up against it. So we were able to climb out on the shed. And some people already behind the building, I think some drivers, had put up a ladder. And so we got down, and I got Mary Lee into the sort of a really run-down old ambulance, and some poor fellow from State Department who had just arrived that morning. He was like 24 and wide-eyed, and he was in the back. But we were flying through, ramming through, careening through the streets of Beirut, as crowded as they were, to get to the hospital. And we got there, and Mary Lou was taken swiftly into surgery. I found my friends, Anne and Bob. They had been the 2 sole survivors, or the 2 only survivors of all the people in that cafeteria. After I saw that Ann Damerel and Bob Pearson were okay, or they were being cared for, I called the AID Washington headquarters to report what was going on, and they wanted to know names and numbers of AID deceased. And so Jill Mandel, the wife of one of the officers at AID there, and I, at the hospital, went to the basement of the hospital, walked through these long, dark corridors, and at the end of the doors opened, and it was the morgue, and they ushered us into a small room, a little ante-room, and a larger room, and the ante-room had the bodies. They were all bodies, and there was the reporter who was the character from The Little Drummer Girl was on the floor in the arms of a Marine who'd been killed, and entering into the other room, I was looking for AID folks, and I saw the Lebanese young man who was this very joyful mail delivery guy for both the embassy and the AID, and his father had been killed in a bombing about 15 or 20 years before that, and he was on a table, missing limbs, but he had a T-shirt on that said, in French, it said Target. And I was looking for our people, and I got to the point where people were stacked around, and I would have to have dug down into the bodies to find the people I was looking for. And so I knew that our two AID members were there, and came back out and made a call back to Washington. The total number killed was 17 Americans and about 63 Lebanese. And so they were the two survivors from that place there where I should have been. And they were both injured, but not, and Damerl was injured significantly, and it took her a year and a half of medical work to get repaired, basically, and Bob just had a little bit of damage. And so at the end of that was about 4 hours at the hospital. I got a ride back to my place, knocked back a couple of Manhattans. I was stunned. I was absolutely in. I wasn't crying. I was shocked. I was totally shocked. And a gentleman from upstairs came down and knocked on the door to make sure we were okay. And then Tom Friedman, the journalist who lived right across the street from us, and his wife knocked on the door to see if I was okay. And so I got to sleep. It was difficult. Had a lot of nightmare activity that night. Got up because the deputy chief of mission was called everybody to a meeting the next morning at the embassy, and to corral everybody, to count heads, to explain that we had to get to work because the Secretary of State was going to come on a visit. And so there were people suffering, there were people mourning, but everybody immediately went to work. We had to move our offices from the destroyed building to the Dorfer building, two houses down, 2 buildings down. And we started having to get ready for lots of newspaper coverage, and writing speeches for the Secretary of State, and basically doing our normal work in the midst of what was really it was like Alice in Wonderland almost. It was so surreal. But we did that, and we got through it. And I think what I want to wrap up to say is that that was a once in a lifetime experience. But danger is part of the experience of international affairs, whether it's diplomatic or international development affairs. And you learn to recognize it, you learn to live with it, you learn to set it aside. And the compensation for that is extraordinary experiences of other countries, other cultures, other languages, and the sense that you're actually making a difference in a place.